let's hand this over to our friend Ryan, who will be telling us a little bit about map editing and developer tools. Give me a sec to prep some stuff up, but in the meantime, may I please request your virtual clap claps for our friend Ryan, who is also in the chat and you can ask questions of at any time during the presentation.
This is a talk about making your own tools when you're making video games. It's not always intuitive, at least it wasn't for me when I was first starting out, that sometimes some of your best spent coding hours aren't actually best spent writing code that's actually shipping in your game. You can actually get a lot of benefit out of writing code and doing automation and not always code, but using tools to automate tasks and write scripts that take care of menial tasks that you wouldn't want to always handle manually. And in this talk, we're going to kind of dig into like why you might want to do that a little more, and then I'll cover a few use cases where I've done that in projects that I've worked on. So leading into that, I want to talk a little about who I am and my background. I'm Ryan. I make video games with JavaScript. For the last, I guess in June it was a year, so over a year now, I've been working on a project called TwilioQuest, which is a sort of weird, like it's a browser-based game, which is where my web experience comes in. But it's an educational role-playing game that teaches people how to code. And that has been a great experience for learning kind of how to actually go through with like deploying an actual project to users, and learning like where it actually makes sense to kind of optimize shipping things. In addition to that, I've worked on a medley of other little games that you can see here. The big one that I'm currently working on now in my spare time is Wildfire Swap, which is a puzzle game also built in web technologies that I'm working on with some other PIGSquad folks too. Yeah, so the central premise here is great tools make great games. I was recently listening to a talk by John Romero from id Software, and he was talking about a lot of things that they learned over the course of making Doom and Quake and a bunch of other games that I didn't even know they made. But he was talking about some core principles to what he thought made it do very well. And one that stood out to me was great tools make great games. And I thought that was sort of fascinating because, especially coming from the web background that I do, a lot of that kind of world is focused on shipping out features fast, getting it to customers, and then just like making new features over top and just internal feature making. And I thought that this focus on trying to think about how tools might actually sometimes be the right thing for you to work on, rather than that next feature, that next little bit of polish. It might make good sense to work on the tool instead. And there's a few main reasons that I've come up with why tools can really pay for themselves. The big one is that we make mistakes. We make them all the time. I'm probably going to misspeak about a dozen times during this talk. And tools are great because they can kind of help us catch those mistakes. There's things like your types when you're writing code, or spell check when you misspell something. Your calendar reminds you when you're about to miss an event. There's tons of things like that we use all the time in our daily life. And we can use those sorts of things in our game making life too. And then sort of to kind of carry off on that, a lot of times doing the best thing for your code base or your team or your project isn't always the easiest thing to do. A lot of times it's you know it's the best thing because it's kind of hard to do, and you're like kind of have to force yourself to do the hard thing even though you don't really want to do the hard thing. And you'll get it most of the time maybe, but sometimes you'll be tired, or someone else will be really distracting, or maybe you just aren't having it today. And so it can be really helpful to make sure that or tools can be really helpful to kind of make it so that the best thing is also the easy thing to do. And so that's another great strength of tools. And then finally, if you're working on a long-term project, it can be really tempting to take a break and start on that next new idea and then leave your old project languishing in the dust. And tools kind of provide a nice middle ground of like, it's like a neat little side project that you can work on. You can write some code, you can get something done, you can make something work, but it's actually still serving your main project, which is kind of nice. So they can be a great break. But so one of the big things that comes up when it comes to talking about tools is the time investment. Why should I spend my precious time making tools instead of just making the thing that I want to make, right? And that's always a hard question, right? This is a hard question. And so this wouldn't be a programming talk without mentioning a KCD comic, so here's my obligatory one. This is sort of a chart that kind of talks about like the trade-off in when it is worth your time and effort to actually do the work to build automation. And there's a lot of like, if you do the task every year for 30 minutes, it's worth 2 hours to automate, whatever. That stuff's sort of arbitrary and kind of, I mean, in practice, you're never going to sit down and do this math because you're going to be wrong on your estimations anyway. But what it really kind of highlights that is helpful is the tasks you do the most often are the ones that are the most worth doing. And this is important because in games, we repeat ourselves a lot, especially once you start getting into the content creation thing. You make this nice engine and then you realize there's nothing to actually do in your game. And then you're on the hook to create like 10, 20, 100, 1,000 different levels. And these things can have different NPCs, they can have different items. Maybe there's a bunch of different themes. Maybe you then need to move things around inside of different levels or to new levels and retheme things. So there's a lot of just kind of data manipulation. And the first thing you'd be inclined to do is kind of do that stuff manually. But when you can really start picking up steam is if you can figure out ways to automate those processes. And that's why games are a particularly good place to find a lot of low-level tasks that you can automate or handle with a tool. And then the nicety of tools is that you can kind of keep complexity outside of your actual game. So in some of those weird tooling scenarios we were just talking about where maybe you have a dozen different levels with a dozen different NPCs, rather than needing to kind of code into your engine and potentially ship bugs to players, you can kind of handle all of that mapping and that data manipulation outside of your game. So tools let you kind of, so you can, rather than waiting for the user to stumble upon the bug, you can kind of catch things that might break in the future before they do. So that's just another big plus about tools, is kind of the more work and the more chance for error that you can front load onto your developers and your content creator team, the sooner they can fix it and the less chance it has to cause problems for you in the future. So yeah, the earlier in the cycle you can catch stuff, the better. So now I want to kind of talk about that's kind of why you would want to use tools. And I would like to now kind of jump into a couple of different use cases where I've used tools that I've thought were pretty slick. So this thing in front of us here is an open source tile editor or map editor called Tiled. I guess it's also a tile editor. And in the ToolQuest project I was mentioning earlier, this is the open source tool that we use to create all of the maps in Tiled or in ToolQuest. And this is where I want to highlight building your own tools doesn't necessarily mean building everything from scratch. A lot of the best things you can do is build on top of what other people have already built. And Tiled is just a great interface for that. Tiled gives you a lot of access to like these importing your tile sets, and you can layer things. So we've layered a lot of different stuff into Tiled, and actually a lot of the tools that we've built are ways of manipulating and reading the data in Tiled. So each of these different kinds of these little objects you can kind of see here, and you can see there's some red areas where we kind of set colliders, but all these little objects have different properties. So like NPCs will say like have the link to a conversation dialogue, and Different challenges will pop up, these different barriers here will kind of pop up a specific code challenge when a player interacts with them. Or they might show like a kind of interaction text, like like, oh, you didn't find anything of interest, like that sort of thing. So Tiled is sort of this nice base for us in TwilioQuest to build a lot of our functionality. And I'm going to dive into just a tiny bit about like what the tiled format, like the file format looks like, and then how we, and one small example of how we kind of read it and manipulate it. So Tiled has a bunch of different formats. There's also an XML format. There's other things too that I don't even know about. But the one that we use is JSON. And we do that because we do everything in JavaScript, and it's very easy to edit JavaScript object notation in JavaScript. So on the left, you'll kind of see this is one of those objects in the previous slide. This is the data representation. So you'll notice there are like X and Y properties that kind of indicate where the tile or the object is in the world. But of special note, we have this properties array, and these are all custom properties that we have added into Tiled that didn't have any meaning inside of Tiled. So here you can see there's a hidden property that's set to true. So this room gate that we're looking at, oops, I didn't mean to click there. We'll see that next. This room gate has a specific identifier, so it's hidden by default, and it has interaction disabled. So the player can't interact with this thing on its own. And that is where we come into the second sort of layer in TwilioQuest that we built on top. And that's sort of, we have this scripting language that lets us reference. So here, this could be a whole nother talk on its own. So I'm not going to dive into this super deep. But just sort of at a glance here, you can kind of see we have a function here that can check if something is a room gate. And we do that by looking at this key property, which you saw assigned over here, and if it includes a room gate. And then we can check if it is the current door. And then what we'll end up doing with that is kind of checking our state. And you'll see in the next video here, we've created like a loop of rooms where the player can walk through, and we're teaching them about arrays and looping through arrays. So they can walk through this looping room, and then rooms will open in a loop around them. So this is like a slice of the code that enables that. And now we will look at the actual, the quick 17-second clip of the demo here. And so you'll notice the player walks around, the progress indicator moves, and the doors around the player are opening and closing. So this door is now closed, the door up here is open. This isn't the, I could have taken a slightly better demo video, but hopefully you caught it there. And so that's just a nice example of how we took an open source tile engine that had no concept of doors, it had no concept of like walking around in a loop, but we created a lot of building blocks like that hidden property, the key property, interaction properties, and it enabled us to express a lot more interesting behavior in the engine without necessarily needing to hard code all that stuff in. So that was more of like there was some code in there and there was some drag and drop in there, but now I want to focus on one more use case that is totally non-code, and that involves using a tool called Zapier. And this is a tool that we do not use currently anyway. Zapier is kind of neat because it has a lot of different potential. So Zapier is sort of, it's hard to give like a quick pitch for Zapier because it does so much, but essentially Zapier lets you read when anything happens, anything that Zapier supports happens, and then do something else that Zapier supports. So in the example that you see in front of you, when this calendar event starts in Google Calendar, I'm sending a Discord message. So that's an example. Like there's a lot of other APIs. You can tweet in response to something, and then you can even. So what you'll notice here is there's actually plus signs. If you pay for Zapier, you can do like if a calendar event, then send a Discord message, then go live on Twitch, then so you can go wild with it. This is a much simpler example than that. Also, I don't pay for Zapier, so I don't know how to do that bit. But I really like this tool because this lets you stitch together a lot of the sort of manual as you work with a team, you start to find a lot more process sort of things that require someone to remember on the team, someone to designated reminder person. Like there's just a lot of process that is involved with just getting a lot of people on the same page to do a thing. And Zapier is great for kind of helping ease some of that burden. So in this particular use case, I was setting up a reminder bot for a book, like a game club that I'm part of. So this just lets you. We'll just dive into it actually. So what you can do with Zapier is there's a lot of just pre-built fields. So like here you'll note I have my my email that I'm linking the calendar from, and I want to say 1 hour before. If this is in the title, scratching the itch. This is our racial justice and equality bundle play group. So it's fun. It's a fun name. But then in response, I'm sending the message, we're playing in an hour, to the Discord general channel with a name called Reminder Bot. So this is sort of the effect of what happens. So I have this event here where it was a recurring calendar event that I set once and I got to forget about. And now we get these nice pings to remind us that hey, we should we should think about what game we want to play tomorrow from the bundle. So this is a great little non-work example, but a place that we're planning to implement this soon that has a little more work practical value is to actually search for all of the Twitch. We do some Twitch streams at work on Toilet Quest. So I do some development streams where I just kind of work on a feature and then answer questions about whatever I'm doing. But we'll have other like content playthroughs or guests occasionally and that sort of thing. So the intention though is going to be to consume our because we already have a Google Calendar where we have to coordinate like who's showing up when, who's doing what. So I'm going to have Zapier parse that in and just say, if there's a calendar event on the streaming calendar, go ahead and ping our public Discord channel and let everyone know, hey, we're going live soon. So there's some that's the next value I see getting this out of work now that I had fun doing it for a private thing. And that's part of the beauty of the tools too, is that you can use them everywhere. There's a lot of places where as our lives are lived more and more online, especially in these very very online times right now, these sorts of things are only more and more useful. So yeah, make some tools. You might even have fun. I definitely recommend it. They aren't as hard as they seem to be, and the best part of them is that you can just start making them for yourself, and if they're kind of sloppy and sort of broken, but mostly work as long as you don't input the 6 wrong keywords that make it explode, then it doesn't matter because it's just an internal tool. So yeah, have fun, make some tools.